I grew up as Sharon Lynn Fort. I was born in Mount Holly Hospital, Mount Holly, New Jersey, on September 14th, 1947. My parents were Maurice and Vivian Fort, although my mother was born as Vivian Murphy, which is important because my mother grew up here, and so did my father, actually. I practiced as a registered nurse for 45 years. I also have a master's in counseling from the University of Michigan to get my bachelor's in nursing, and I went in New Jersey, the university up there, my master's in counseling. I currently live in Vincenttown, New Jersey, and am married, no children. I had a brother, Stephen Fort, who unfortunately is not with us, but I always knew about Whitesbog. I grew up knowing about Whitesbog. I grew up in Mount Holly, and I never actually came to Whitesbog until I was maybe in my late high school years or early college years, when I was out with my mom and dad. Or my dad and my brother. We were just driving around the Pines. We used to do that all the time. And my dad said, "Oh yeah, that's the road to Whitesbog," or "That's the road where Whitesbog is." And I'm like, "What do you mean Whitesbog is? It's still here?" All these years they talked about it at the dinner table, and I didn't know it was still here. So I said, "Take me there now," and he did. He was a good dad. Anyway, he brought me in, and we just drove around and looked. And all the buildings were still here, but since that was probably somewhere around 1965, they were not in the best of shape. You could see that they were pretty worn out. Although neither of the packing houses were here. Well, I think both of them had burned by that time. At any rate, it was incredible to see it. So that's when I first learned about it. But I don't know that I came here. Once in a while I'd come here with my parents for like the blueberry festivals or something that was happening that once my mother found out that Whitesbog Preservation Trust was here, she was like, "Okay, let's get involved in this." And she did. Made many donations, was a member. Now my mom's family moved here, I think it was in 1923. So she was only 3 when they moved here, and she had a younger brother, George, who was maybe 6 months old. And my grandfather was a mechanic, a good mechanic, and he was hired to be the head mechanic here at Whitesbog in the mechanic shop. He did that job from 1923 to 1943. Approximately, and I don't know for certain. I think it was probably in the late spring, early summer of 43 when they moved, because both of them were from Maryland, from Cambridge, Maryland, and they moved back there because the war had started in 42, and because waiting till the spring, their youngest son, my Uncle Norman, had was getting out of 8th grade, or he was 16, he would finish school for the year, whatever that was. And they moved back there, and he actually, at 16, did quit school and did go into the Navy, but I think it was towards the end of the war. But in World War II, my dad was in first Africa, then Europe, and he came home first, even though he left for last. I think my mother, she enlisted before him, and then she ended up going before him. She was in New Guinea, and she worked as a stenographer, a person in the office kind of thing. My mom's younger brothers did not get involved. Actually, my mother didn't really either when she left here, until she found out that it was under the trust, and then she got involved as a volunteer and donating and things like that. She wasn't young at that point, though. At any rate, her younger brothers, they both went to the service. One of them settled in Burlington City, and that's where he lived until he died. The other one, that's my cousin Renee's. She's the one that's still involved as a volunteer person. My other uncle, the youngest one, Norman, he actually was a few years after George. I mean, they'd been living here for a while, and I often wonder if something happened, and maybe my grandmother had gotten pregnant and then lost a child here, because when she got pregnant with Norman, at least after the crop was in, because he was born in January, at the end of January, she went home. She went down to Maryland and had him down there. So he was the only one of the kids born in Maryland. And he became a pilot, which is really interesting because my Uncle George, who was a Maine mechanic, I mean, he was a mechanic, the one that lived in Burlington, he was in the Air Force and flew in the war, and my Uncle Norman was in the Navy. And he became a pilot. It was just, and he made his life as a pilot and as an airplane mechanic. And he lived back and forth between New Jersey and Maryland. My dad's brothers and sisters, he was the oldest, and the others, his great-grandfather, he had a blueberry patch in New Lisbon area. It was really run by, I don't know how he ran it because he was working here too. But I think they grew up working that patch. I think my grandmother went there a lot because that's what my Aunt Doris told me, one of my dad's younger sisters. And none of them really got into working the blueberries. However, my great-grandfather's sons, I think I've mentioned Lester and Harold already, that they had worked in as superintendents here after his death. There were two other boys, and that was Lester and Elmer. Elmer was the youngest. Actually, Elmer was about 7 months younger than my father, who was his nephew. So it was one of those that my grandmother was pregnant the same time her stepmother was pregnant for the last time. So, interesting. It's just interesting things. And my dad and Elmer grew up as best friends, and he became a teacher. And he lived in Pemberton, not too far away, but he came back and helped, especially in the blueberry season when he wasn't teaching, but at nights and on the weekends during the cranberry season as well, because he knew the routine. He'd grown up doing it. We have pictures of him in the fields, working with the workers.